So you may have been around long enough to remember the old bracelet that was around called, WWJD, What Would Jesus Do? That's not the series. The series is more like this. What would Jesus undo, or what would he edit in our lives? So you know how that works. You type something out, you do something wrong, and a nice thing nowadays is you can go back over and edit. So if we think about our lives, and we think about Jesus who's working in us, what would Jesus want to undo in us? What would he want to change in us as we continue to grow in life and faith? So today we're going to be talking in Revelation chapter 3. You can jump there if you want now. We'll be there a little bit later, looking a little further down in verses 15 and following. But we're going to talk a little bit about today a place called Laodicea. So 5 languages of love. Many of you, I hope, have heard of that. And if you haven't, you need to learn about that as quick as you can. But the 5 languages of love, one of the ones that are in there is gift giving. That's a way of expressing or receiving love. And you've heard me talk before about this, and if you have, you found out that God's sense of humor is this, that one of my wife's prime ways of expressing and receiving love is gift giving, and it is absolutely not just even 0, it's like -20 for me. Gifts are just kind of lost on me. Now, there's a couple things that go on in my life. One is I sure want to be aware of that, and even though I've worn poor Ursula down, I'm trying to, do better. It may not look like it, but I try to be aware of that. But I also, here's the worst thing, and I'm just going to be transparent with you, is when I receive gifts, it's not that the person isn't meaningful to me who gives the gift, it's just that I don't think about them. So I've had times where someone has given me a gift. It may have been mailed, may have been dropped off, and the package is there, and I forget to even open it. I mean, isn't that horrible? I don't even think about it. So I have a gift, and then I forget to open it, and I may not even know who brought it. It's just sitting there. And then later on, I start, looking at it, and maybe before I've had a chance to open it, what happens is the person may text and say, "Hey, did you see it?" And I'm like, uh-oh. And you don't want to lie, right? And especially if it's a phone conversation, say, "Hey, thanks," especially if you don't know what it is, And so then what happens is especially if it's a text, it's a good thing with me, I go open the package, look at it, and very much appreciate it. But I realize that when it comes to gift receiving, I'm oftentimes a little bit indifferent, right? Not meaning to be, but I'm just a little indifferent when it comes to gift giving. And so what happens for me is we look at our text today and we think about gift giving. I'm wondering, for people where gift giving is such a blessing and they see me being indifferent, and if they really find out who the real me is, how do they feel? Okay, so let's jump ahead then. God has given to you and to me the greatest gift of all. I love the gift of my family. I love the gift of my wife. I love the gift of my sons, my daughter-in-law. I love the gift of my life. I love the gift of you. But it pales in comparison to the gift of salvation, right? That God would give his own son. And here Jesus, he comes to earth. We celebrate that and we think very sentimentally about that at Christmas. And then up comes to us Good Friday, and this year we did it at home, right? And yet it strikes us deeply that God's son would die on the cross. And then throughout the Easter season, we're saying these words. Let's do it again. Christ is risen. He is risen indeed. Alleluia. The Son who would come in a manger, who die a death for us on the cross, also was raised from the dead. And this great gift is ours. And yet, how do we treat that gift? How do we look at that gift that God has given us, that he has made us a part of it? He just hasn't said, "Here you go, look at this thing." He's sent us on a mission. Jesus comes and says to you and to me, he says, "As the Father has gifted or sent me, so I am gifting or sending you." What an amazing gift. And how do we treat it? How do we look at that? How does our life reflect the presence of Jesus? And here's the thing, it's just observation of the world. What we often see is, people say, yeah, I believe in Jesus. But, worship, you and I have probably been doing better since it's been online. We don't have as many ways to excuse ourselves, and it's easy to have a cup of coffee. But Sunday morning, man, I'm tired. Devotional time during the day, living out the mission of God, That's why we have other people do that, right? Not me. Indifference. Now, in this book of Revelation, we do get God talking about this indifference and how that looks. And it's in here in the letters, Revelation 3, if you want to look at that, verses 14 and following. And it says, "And to the angel of the church in Laodicea write the words of the Amen." That is the so be it, the giver, if you will, the faithful and true witness, the beginning of God's creation. That is Jesus, through whom all things were created. I know your works. Now listen. You are neither cold nor hot. Would that you were either cold or hot. So because you are lukewarm and neither hot nor cold, I will spit you out of my mouth. Whoa. There's a picture, huh? Now let's think about, why is he writing this to, of all places, Laodicea? He's writing this to Laodicea because this particular church really has many blessings. Now, you wouldn't think so, because 35 years before this letter was written, much of the city was destroyed by an earthquake. They experienced having to rebuild from nothing. Now, if you think about us too, we've seen that. If you've been here long enough, you had to rebuild life from the 80s and the whole oil bust and watching people go away in droves. If you were here during Harvey and maybe you yourself were flooded, you remember the feel, the smell, and the discouragement of walking into your home. You remember what businesses were closed and what went down, and you remember that maybe, but not enough, because things coming back, homes being rebuilt. Maybe right now you're living in that earthquake. It's watching. It may not have affected you directly, but you've known friends who've lost jobs, both people. Or maybe it's that coffee shop that you love that said we can't stay open, or that pizza place like we have just up the road here that said enough is enough. We're feeling it. But it's interesting how quickly we forget. We go through the oil bust of the 80s and things come back and we kind of forget. It's like things will never be the same, or maybe it would be like the 9/11. We'll never go back to where we were. And yet right in that time, people certainly seem to want to come back and find God. And within a few years, everybody went back to what they'd been doing anyway. So nothing really changed. Harvey, we've had those things that went on. It caught our attention, but we get busy with life. With Laodicea, what happened too is they had a real blessing there. They had nearby two places by which they could, after they'd rebuilt their theaters and their homes and all the things, they had aqueducts, these amazing things that were around. And so near them was this city called Colossae, like the book of Colossians. And then there was another place, Herodes, which had hot springs. So their idea was, well, let's bring aqueducts from these other cities, and we'll take that cold water, and then we'll have that hot water, and won't that be amazing to pipe that in, if you will? The problem is by the time it ran through the aqueduct, as it ran toward them, from both the cold and the hot, by the time it reached Laodicea, it was no longer hot like they wanted, nor was it cold. It's kind of like Houston when you turn on the cold water in the summer and it all turns hot if your pipes are out. It wasn't that hot. That would have helped. So when he uses this picture with them, he knows that they understand neither hot nor cold. And he was challenging them And at the same time, he's challenging us today is to ask, what would Jesus undo in our life? And would it be the fact that outside of these times of crisis is that we detach ourselves from God? We're indifferent about the fact that people are dying without knowing about Jesus Christ? Is it the aspect that even during this time, we're more worried about what we need and what we want to find normal than we are to find out where God is moving to bring people to Him? Are we detached and indifferent? And the way he puts it there is, it's not even so much, I spit you out of my mouth. It's almost like you make my stomach turn. So what would Jesus want to do with us? How would he want to move in our lives in a way that brings us out of that detached and indifferent mindset? And I guess you and I have to finally own, why is there such a tendency for us to go that way? And I think there's at least two things. I'm sure we could come up with more. But one, I think, is that illusion of self-sufficiency, that idea of that we can handle things. And he talks to them about that. So in Revelation chapter 3, he says, listen, you say, I am rich, I have prospered, and I need nothing. Yeah. That's us most of the time, right? Oh, I don't have that much money. Well, compared to 99% of the world, we are rich. We get what we want and when we want. Self-sufficiency, the illusion of it. He says to them, you're not even realizing that you're wretched, pitiable, poor, blind, and naked. It's kind of like saying, let's just take a few weeks of shutting down the economy. Let's find out what you've really been counting on. Ouch. That hurts. So the illusion of self-sufficiency is certainly one of them. Another piece of that, I think, is that just we're distracted. We get, that worry that comes from trying to hold on to the things that we have. And, we know how this moves with us as we have life happening. We have good intentions on neighboring and helping to connect with our neighbors. And yet, that very week, it always happens. That's not even a fault of ours. We get a sick kid, right? Or the dog gets down. Or something happens with school that we have to go, and all these things are coming, and we get distracted, and we just, in a sense, I'll use a phrase I used weeks ago with those guys. We kick the can down the road, and we go, okay, I had good intentions, but we don't really get back to being undistracted. It just keeps happening. And part of it I know happens, but part of it is we allow ourselves to be distracted by all these things that are going on. And so when he's talking to them, he says, listen, I counsel you to buy from me gold refined by fire so that you may be rich and so that you may clothe yourself. And salve, he jumps down to say, to anoint your eyes so that you may see. What do we need to see? We really need to see where God's at work. Seek where he's working. Seek what he's doing. And when we don't have indifference ruling us, is that we begin to move there. Now, when we're distracted and we have illusions of self-sufficiency, why is that so true in our country? And it's true in other places too. When we've done mission trips, I've found that we've had enough missionaries there, and we've had enough here that this has been the danger. We have just enough of Jesus to get us by. Just think about a lot of things, and this may not be medically true, but this is the way I think about it. When I get my flu shot and they give us things to help with our immune system, is that they just give us enough. It may not even be live material at this point, but they just give us enough so our body will react and push off the real virus. And I wonder if you and I do that too with Jesus. We have just enough Jesus that we've become immune, if different. And it's this, that We have a little bit of worship when we need to or want to, a little bit of faith, whatever that means. We just want more comfort, more security, and we run to Jesus when there's trouble, but most of the time we just say, I'm fine. And we don't ever find ourselves really digging into pursuing Him more closely. We want to feel better, but we don't want to change. So how do we live with indifference? How do we let Jesus, how do we move to not have ourselves not being edited by Jesus, undoing our indifference? So I think there's a few things we need to do. One thing is that we have to be less concerned with impressing other people and not understanding that God is our main focus. Timothy wrote this, is that people become lovers of self, and when he said that, that was a way of understanding that that aspect was we care more about what other people think than what God thinks. Instead of being so obsessed with what we can get now, that we begin to focus on our eternity now and forever with God, that we understand His presence today and our forever starts now through eternity. We also stop rationalizing sin. You know, you and I do that all the time. We rationalize what is really sin. Now, in society, this is really easy, you know. People don't break the sixth commandment with adultery. We just have friends with benefits, right? We use that phrase, friends with benefits. That's not sin, right? That's just friends with benefits. We don't have pornography. What we have is adult entertainment. When we talk about what we watch and what we consume in books and movies, we just kind of turn an eye to that. And if we can rename it, great. And when it comes to Jesus, we don't think about how our life, we think back to last week with a blessing, how that shines on who God is in terms of how we are. If we really understand that, we begin to live our life more intentionally with how we speak and who we are. And we, instead of turning to God only when we need Him, when He benefits us, we begin to understand that He's all we need. If you really think about it, and so many have looked at this and asked the question, how different are Christians in the world? And if we're asking Jesus to undo parts of us, if we're asking Him to undo who we are, what we're really saying to Him is this, is that I want to be different than the world. I want my speaking and my thinking, my filters, to look at something different than the world. So what it really happens is this good old thing that you and I call, as Lutheran Christians, is confession, is that indifference finally hits us and we begin to confess more deeply, not just on the surface of, oh yeah, I need Jesus or I need to do this, but we really dig more deeply into how we think and who we are and what God is looking to do in us. How the church looks. Things are not going to get back to normal, friends. And that's a good thing. Because the normal meant that we were just kind of playing along with everybody else. What we want is the new abnormal, if you will, or the newer normal of God taking what He's done in us, bringing the forgiveness of sins, bringing a new set of eyes, bringing to us, as He has brought the wonderful water of baptism, that it doesn't become a picture of neither hot nor cold, but lukewarm, but there's a richness that we continue to dig into by which we see every part of our life. As we go back and make decisions about which things we will do and not do, that we filter that through God and say, through the blessing of the cross, through the blessing of this newness and this wonderful gift You have for us, God, where would You have us to go? I'm not going to give you a list of new behaviors or things to try for a couple of weeks, 5 steps to a better life. No, let's just keep asking God now and in the weeks to come after this is over, God, where are You working? We know He's going to say, I'm working through the cross and forgiveness. So maybe we need to dig back and say, God, where are You working in my life? And He says, yeah, that's a good place to start editing What would Jesus undo in my life and yours? Indifference. May God bless us in Jesus to become difference makers in the time to come. In Jesus' name, amen.